chair this morning, Dr. Nanki. My paper is about impacted by war more than by leisure, and I proceed from my own understanding of the conference theme that leisure can be positive and or negative. It's not necessarily negative, and in the case of a built heritage site, such as what I shall present in my paper, sometimes the leisure is understood to come from the hordes of tourists who descend upon a heritage site. Now again, that may be positive or negative, but I would like to focus on other factors that impact the balance of life for a heritage site, and I would like to focus on war. My presentation is focused on a certain part of the Philippines in the south. If you look at the map, the southernmost island there is Mindanao. That's the map on the left. And then the one on the right is a zoomed map of Mindanao. In the middle of that is a huge Everglade known as the Liguasan Marsh. It's a water world composed of 288,000 hectares of water and islets and rivers and streams. That is an aerial photograph of the Everglade known as the Liguasan Marsh, but it is also the most impenetrable part of Mindanao. Very few people go to that area because it is rocked by war. And right now there are two players there. Well, three if you include the government of the Republic of the Philippines. But there are two armed insurgency groups there. The first one is the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, which is currently on negotiations with the government. It's a moderate group that wants to seek autonomy for the Muslim population of Mindanao. The other is a very small player called the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters. It's also an armed insurgency group, but it's a breakaway group of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. And so, because of the presence of these armed groups in the marsh, it is impossible to enter the marsh. However, this is the question that I would like to answer in my presentation about the balance of life. Is war the balance of life for cultural heritage survival? And so I went to a short field work to look at the conditions of two built heritage sites. One is named Fort Reina Regente, which is right in the middle of the Liguasan Marsh. And it has been seen by few people because few people can enter the marsh because of the war that is going on. And the other one is another fort made of stone, built of stone by the Spanish colonizers of the Philippines, which is right in the population center, and so it is accessible to people. So I compared the two and looked at the question of the balance of life in terms of the impact that they have had in the past few years. So let me start first with Fort Reina Regente. Fort Reina Regente was named after Queen Regent Maria Cristina of Spain. She sat as Queen Regent from 1885 to 1902. You will recall that at one time in the history of Spain, the king suddenly died, leaving the queen a widow, and she was about to give birth to a baby, and the baby that she gave birth to became Alfonso XIII, Alphonse XIII of Spain. But before the boy could become of age, she had to sit as Queen Regent. And so at the time that she was Queen Regent, the Spanish colonizers of the Philippines honored her with a fort that is named after her. is no longer there. It was demolished by the later colonizer, the Americans. And so we had to rely on photographs and illustrations. In this case, we were able to secure an illustration dated 1896 from the Spanish National Library. And that is how the fort looks like. It's in the middle of the marsh. There is an island in the marsh where it is located, but it has not been, the ruins of the fort has not been seen by most present-day Filipinos. Another illustration of the fort, that is the Blockhead Tower. And later, the colonizers of the Philippines, the Americans, used the fort as a garrison in order to guard the traffic, the boat traffic of people and boat traders in the marsh. And this is a photo taken about at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, found in the National Archives of the United States, about boats, showing boats that fill the traffic of the waterways of the marsh. So the Americans used the fort as a garrison. And so about 3 years ago, we asked the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, do you know where Fort Reyna Regente is? And the reply to us was, we do not know, because it cannot be located. It's inside a war zone, and it is unsafe for us to go there. So we have not documented the existence of the ruins of the fort, because as you know, it's ruins now. It was demolished by the later colonizers, the Americans. And so, let me go to the next file. Charlie, I need to. I'm sorry for that. So let's continue. And so I organized a small team of field workers to look into the location of the old fort. And this is the waterway. It's a photo of the waterway where we took off for travel. And then that's me there. With the armed soldiers of the insurgents of the area, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, with whom we had to ask permission to enter territory because it's a war territory and they controlled the area. So we had to ask for their permission and explain to them the purpose of the trip, of the field trip. And so they guarded the trip most of the way. As soon as we reached an island there, we had to do some trekking until finally this is what we found. We finally found the ruins of Fort Reyna Regente. Sorry for the graphics there. So this is, we believe that this is part of the ruins of the Blockhead Tower. It's covered by vegetation and forests. And because it was later destroyed, demolished by the Americans, because it is said that they had to use the stones of the fort in order to pave the streets of a certain town, we only found the foundations of the old posts of the fort. So after we found the fort, we posed for a photograph with the armed militants of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. This is a moderate group, They're not extremist, not radical, they're not allied with the Islamic State. All they want is just autonomy for the Filipino Muslims in Mindanao. And as of the moment, they are in negotiations with the government. And once they are able to have the Bangsamoro state, they will have an instrument of government there that will take care of cultural heritage. And so this was our way of helping them prepare for governance. Outside the island, as we were already on our way home, we found this old bridge that was built by the Americans in 1927. It's dated there June 1927. And so we went to the other fort called Fort Piquet. Now this time, this fort is located along the National Highway in a town called Piquet in a province known as North Cotabato. So we visited the fort. It's accessible to the public. And this is what we found. These are photos of the fort. It's also made of coral stone, built in the 1890s by Spain in order to use it as a garrison because Spain wanted to subjugate the Filipino Muslims under the Spanish flag. So they had to build all these military structures in order to subjugate the people of Mindanao. And today, the fort, in contrast to the previous one, this fort is marked with an official marker of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. And so it is protected now by the state. That is the marker there. It is in Filipino language. And it says there that it was built in 1893 by Spain, and then subsequently used by the Americans. And then it was occupied by the Japanese forces in 1942 to 1945, and then taken back by the Americans in 1945. And then it was declared a National Historical Landmark on April 24, 2012. So this is Fort Piquet. That's the inside of the fort. As you can see, there are no crowds there. It is not impacted by leisure, by tourism. Because even though it is found along the National Highway, but it is part of an area that is perceived, rightly or wrongly, by outsiders and by the greater public as a war zone. Even though the town lies on the fringes of the war zone and it is merely an evacuation area. So no one goes there because they are afraid of war. And so that's how desolate the fort looks like. And so I would like to ask the question, is war the balance of life for cultural heritage survival? Probably we have seen a lot of prehistoric monuments in Southeast Asia. The ones in Angkor Wat is just one of them. Borobudur, probably Indonesia. Prambanan in Yogyakarta. Maybe the temples, the pagodas of Bagan in Myanmar. They survived the 21st century, even if they have been descended upon by hordes of tourists. But in my case, I would like to ask, these two forts that we discovered, that we found out, what is the balance of life for them? Is war the source of that balance for life? And while it is true that sometimes leisure comes in the form of tourism hordes, and while it is true that sometimes tourism can wreak havoc on cultural heritage sites, since they get commodified as other view destinations, but also the absence of these tourism hordes is not exactly the opposite. That is, if there are no tourists, can they survive life? So, is the absence of tourists the source of that balance of life? And my answer to that is no. When the tourist hordes do not come, the sites become desolate, that's true. And when they are desolate, probably the more chances that they have at being preserved. But also at the same time, we have to take note that war has also hindered their accessibility to be known and to teach future generations, which is part of the balance of life, education. Not just being seen by the public, but the public becoming educated at the past, at history. History is part of the balance of life. And is war always a negative factor for the survival of cultural heritage sites? Yes, as we have seen elsewhere in the world. But then we have to take note that there are agencies, for example, the UNESCO, which sometimes partners with the International Committee of the Red Cross or the Red Crescent, as the case may be, for the protection of heritage sites in armed conflict zones. Of course, we have seen some of the more negative examples, the Buddhas of Bamiyan in Afghanistan, and lately the Great Mosque of Al-Nuri in Mosul. Both were destroyed by radical extremists. And so it is not always true that war creates a negative impact. Sometimes war can mitigate, but then there are also things that we can do in order to preserve cultural heritage sites when these are present in armed conflict zones. So that is the end of my presentation of Kunkrang.